Again live. Hello everyone and welcome back to our 2019 Oscar Movie Marathon. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Quintine.
We just talked about Survivor, but now we're going to talk about movies, which is an entirely different subject. If you have oddly not listened to any of our other Oscar Marathon related shows, we are attempting to see as many of the Oscar nominated films as possible before the award ceremony. And so we had a previous introduction episode where we just talked about the nominations. We had an update where we talked about the movies we had seen since. But now we're going to do that again and talk about the movies we saw since the last time. The brief format is if only one of us has seen the movie, we'll do just a very brief review. If we've both seen the movie, more in depth. So, what movies have you seen since the last update?
I have seen BlacKkKlansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, and that honestly may be it.
Okay.
I think that was it. I had a lot of things to happen in the spring with me. I have a lot of busy things that I need to do for work, and I focused on two ones that I really wanted to see, and also had large followings, or not followings, but large numbers of nominations. I was going to see Into the Spider-Verse, but I was going to see it at an outdoor presentation format, and it's been raining here, even though I live in Phoenix, which is a desert. The weather has been not cooperative, and so they canceled the
bummer,
or delayed the Into the Spider-Verse that I was going to watch outdoors.
That is a bummer, because that's definitely a movie everybody should see. I'll just state it that unequivocally.
Yes, and to be fair, it is still available in the regular theater. It was just disappointing that I had a plan to see it in this format and was unable to do it.
I hear you. So the movies that I've seen since the last update are Vice and Mirai and The Favorite and A Star is Born, which means for the first time in several years, I am sitting here before the award ceremony having seen all of the Best Picture nominees and all the Best Animated Feature nominees. And I'm tooting my own horn just a little bit because I am fairly pleased with myself.
Yes. And looking at my upcoming schedule, it looks like I'm going to get to all but one of the Best Pictures.
Oh, great.
Because I can see Star is Born, and I'm going to see The Favorite. I already have the plans for both of those prior to, and I know we're coming up on it.
This Sunday.
Yes. I just don't see a way that I can get Spider-Verse with having missed it when I was going to. Ralph Breaks the Internet, I think I might be able to see, and Mariah I'm not going to be able to see. So I won't be able to match you.
Well, Green Book, you're missing still Green Book also?
I'll miss Green Book. Yeah. Just because when I'm looking at where I can fit movies in, and where A Star is Born and The Favorite are just ones I'm more interested in.
Yeah. No, hey, that's
categories. Yeah. So
absolutely. Like, obviously, there's see the movies that you want to see, and it's all a balancing act of scheduling.
Right, and for me. And I think actually for you, I mean, you're obviously at a much higher percentage now than I am, but recently this is still a pretty high percentage for you, I think.
It is. And I think that's a combination of me being able to see more movies this year than a couple of years, a couple of the recent past years, but also just because there are several movies that have a number of nominations, and so by seeing those, it's easier to get that higher percentage. But it's the first time in several years that I've been able to see all of the Best Picture nominees before the ceremony.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm currently at 42.5. I feel comfortable that I'll be over 50, which I think it's been several years that I've been over half. So I will be happy about that. You look like you could get into that 75-80%,
Well,
depending on what
I'm
you're.
at 70.8 right now. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to see any more before Sunday
Oh
because
yeah, because you're
I'm
going
going on
on.
a trip, leaving on a trip Saturday morning. So we'll see. But in the meantime, though, the movies that I have seen for a brief review, because we haven't both seen them, would include for this time A Star is Born and The Favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And then the movies that we can discuss in detail now, Ready Player One and A Quiet Place, we could have done last time. We just didn't get to them in our discussion. But now we also have Bohemian Rhapsody, Vice, and Black Klansman that we have seen in common. So, briefly, A Star is Born, I watched just earlier today. And I'll go ahead and start with I'll start by mentioning I have not seen any of the previous versions of A Star is Born. I went in knowing only like the movie trailer level version of what the story was. And so, I take that back. Certain details about the ending had been spoiled for me. Like, not any specifics about them, but some general subject matter that I won't get into now. But if you've seen any of the other previous versions of the movie, then you probably know what I'm talking about. I'll leave it right now at just there's some heavy subject matter in this movie that could be hard to watch for some people. I think that the music and the performances and the craft of the filmmaking are all very good. But it's not a movie that leaves you feeling great at the end, I'll say. So that's it's a well-made movie designed to produce complicated feelings, and it succeeded at that. The Favorite, on the other hand, I just really loved. I don't know that everybody would love it as much as I did, but boy, I sure did. It is a story about two women each kind of jockeying for position as the favorite of Queen Anne, who is the Queen of England in 18th century, England. Apparently, and I didn't know this when I watched the movie, it is somewhat based on real history. It's slightly fictionalized, and it also obviously depicts things that we would have no way to know for real. But it, by and large, actually does hew to the actual true story of the situation, just with added detail and speculation between the lines, right?
Right.
But it's a gorgeous movie. It is all natural light, and so that means that, we're looking in all of these, like, all the daylight shots are obviously, when it's outside, it's straightforward. But then when we're inside, all the light's coming from the windows. And then when it's at night, it's all coming from candles. And that produces some really cool effects. I mean, it's a great look, for one. But then there's also, like, a crucial scene that I won't get into, like, what's happening there. But there's a scene where Rachel Weisz is having to make her way through this empty, dark, long hallway in this castle, carrying the candle to light her way. And just the way it's shot is that the only thing we can see in frame is the candlelight illuminating her face as she reacts to what she just saw in this movie. And it's just amazing. And so the performances are great. The script is great. I loved all of it. I'm not saying it is my favorite necessarily, but it's definitely one of my favorites this year, for sure. Might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it sure was mine. So that's A Star is Born and The Favorite. Do you want to cover Ready Player One and A Quiet Place first, just because we kind of didn't get to them from last time, or might have less to say about them total? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, since you mentioned them, let's just go ahead and knock them out.
Sure. So Ready Player One, I think, is just nominated for visual effects, which makes sense for that movie. It's certainly a visual effects heavy movie. What? So, what did you know about the movie going in? Had you read the book?
I had not read the book.
Okay.
Um, all I knew about it was that it was basically going to be sort of this melting pot of pop culture for people in a certain age range.
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, that's told through the idea of this. Not really. It's not like really like The Sims or like Second Life or whatever, but
Yeah.
like sort of
It's virtual reality.
yeah, this virtual reality um, gaming future. So I knew all those kind of the broad strokes of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and going into it only knowing that, I really, really enjoy watching this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, like it's not like it doesn't move me. Like I don't really think there's a grand point to it, which maybe there is in the book, or maybe
Well,
not. Maybe that's
so
part of the issue with it.
we can
Yeah.
have that conversation. I think that you and I are probably on the same page. That I thought the movie was a lot of fun to watch. I don't know that it deserves any nominations other than this one, for visual effects. Yeah, it is serviceable but fun. It moves along. It's got some cool things in it. The Shining sequence in particular is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's all really cool. I mean, it just lots of really fun things. Really, and like you said, there's a serviceable story.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually probably seen it now, multiple times because it's one of those movies that you can put on easily.
Yeah.
Like once it came on HBO, such an easy thing. Like if you need to kill a half an hour before something else, or you're cooking dinner and you just want something that you want some kind of popcorny like thing that you're okay with in the background. Riding on an airplane, if you're not really into any of the, like, I'm willing to watch that movie again on an airplane if I don't like any of the.
Yeah,
if there's nothing that strikes me from their new selections, like I'll put that on.
It's easy to watch casually.
Yeah, I've watched it twice on an airplane. I've watched it pieces of it multiple times cooking dinner. So I've seen the whole movie in a way so it's kind of fallen into that lexicon of movie for me where it's one that I maybe won't see from start to finish ever again or not frequently,
Yeah.
but I will always watch parts of it and I will enjoy the parts because the way the movie's constructed, like you don't necessarily. Like I don't feel like once you've seen it from start to finish, like I don't feel like you're missing anything if you just watch a half hour and you like enjoy one of the little mini sequences.
It's all just about supporting the action set pieces, right? I mean, it's kind of just about stringing those together, and that's fine. A lot of movies are made that way these days.
Well, and it makes sense for what it's supposed to be, which is sort of an homage to video games,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, yes, the sum of the movie makes sense in the way that it progresses, but the reality is really each level.
Right.
And so you could just turn it on and watch a level and be fine and leave and not feel like you missed anything,
Yeah. So to compare it to the book, I think it changes some significant things that, we could debate which way is better. It does improve a couple of things. The book got a lot of acclaim in certain circles and then a significant backlash in slightly different circles, partly just because it really does sort of fetishize 80s nostalgia by setting up a scenario where it makes even a little bit of sense that a teenager in the future is obsessed with 80s pop culture. And gives like some reason why that would be. And I think the theme in the movie that the world is so kind of grim that young people don't have anything to look forward to and that's why they look back. That is barely there in the book.
Mm.
It feels a little bit like if you squint, you could sort of see like, oh, it's kind of satire, right? But it's also mostly about hey, let's make an adventure story where the cool skills that our hero has is an obsessive knowledge of 80s pop culture trivia. And there's some interesting things to be found there, but also the problem is that it came out a couple of years before, like Gamergate and stuff like that, where the archetype of the ultra nerd who knows everything about that stuff has lost some of its luster these days. So I think there's some backlash on that regard. And also I think that I didn't read the second book, but what I read about it was that the author seems like he's maybe kind of a one-trick pony, which is unfortunate. I haven't read the second book. I can't say for sure. That's just what I heard some people review it. Because I read the first book and liked it on a certain level of, oh, hey, I recognize those references. That's kind of fun. And there's some exciting, cool ideas in there, but it's very kind of surfacey. And like once you start trying to look for any deeper meaning, it starts getting a little bit icky in some places.
Yeah, and I don't think the movie really elaborates on that. Maybe like you said, if the idea of like at least giving you the why,
mm-hmm.
you know, like why did these guys know this stuff?
Yeah,
you know, that helps a lot, you know, in sort of the, you know, transition of it. But yeah, there's nothing deep in this. I mean, it's sort of
and it's fine. The movie kind of just smooths out the rough edges from the book, and it has some cool things. It takes the cool parts and makes a generic plot with some neat ideas in it, and then puts some really cool action set pieces in there. Works fine.
Yeah. I like watching it. Mm-hmm. Don't think it was the best movie of the year.
Yeah. I think we're on the same page there.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So then we have A Quiet Place, which is nominated for sound editing, and then was there one more? No, I think that's it.
No, it's just one.
Just the sound editing. It does make sense that that would be the one to give it. I mean, you know, either that or mixing. I guess you could make the case either way. But
I mean, this is one that I've actually read that there are people who felt that it was snubbed on some of the other production.
Yeah, and I could see that. I think it's a very well-made movie. I have one extremely petty gripe about it.
What's that?
So this is something that I am perhaps oversensitive to, which is a mild phobia of puncture wounds on the feet. And it's one of the reasons that, like, I have a hard time watching, for example, the end sequence of Home Alone, because there's the bit where he steps on the nail, it goes through his foot, and like that just it just sends all my little mental red flags pinging, and it's very upsetting and hard to watch for me. Yeah. And so, in this movie, that happens to someone. And I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it, except that it makes no sense for a nail to be where it is shown on that step. If you look at the step, it's a nail in the middle of the stair, not even where the underneath piece is, where the sharp end is sticking up out of the top. And what happens in it is that it had been bent over so that it wouldn't be sticking up, but then something catches on it to pull it up. But I'm just thinking, how would there ever be a nail there? And it just felt so contrived, and I don't think it would have bothered me, except that I was so upset by it happening in the first place that it made me want to say, but why is there even a nail there? So, like I said, super petty nitpick. I don't want to make more of a big deal than that, but it did bother me.
It bothered you enough that even though we were done talking last time, you still told me about how angry you were about this thing.
Did I? I don't even remember.
And how you were going to bring it up when we talked about this movie. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I don't even remember that I said that, but I believe it.
Yes, this is not the first time I've heard you yell about this. It literally happened a week or two ago when
I feel like
we
I'm red in
it
the
was
face
off
now.
camera. Like
Yeah.
I was like, we had stopped. I think I was cooking dinner or something, and we were just sort of like
Yeah.
kind of filtering off into our evening. And you
Mm-hmm.
were still so fired up that you hadn't got to talk about this yet.
So, like I said, I totally acknowledge this is something that is like that's a me thing, not the movie thing. Although I will
I mean, the movie
maintain,
did put it in it.
yeah, I'll maintain that it makes no sense for the nail to be there. I don't think there's any real wiggle room. I don't see how they can even argue that it makes sense. Obviously, they contrived it so that it could set up the situation, and I don't really even object to that in principle, except that just because I have a thing about stepping on a nail like that, it makes me extra mad about it. So
Yeah, and I agree with you once you told me. It just in the flow of the movie, because it wasn't a thing that bothered me that much. I just didn't pay that much attention. And
well, right, yeah. I mean, it's not a big deal, really. I just wish that they could have done something else to just make it make a little bit more visual sense.
like have like Kevin McAllister like set it up, put it in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's a trap, and then the paint can swings down to hit the sound monster in the face. Um,
Outside of that,
yeah, the
really
actual
cool
movie.
premise.
Yeah,
Yeah, fun movie. Like, it's scary, but not. It's not like a jump scare, terrifying movie. It's more of like it's very thrilling, and I really and the premise, like that part is thrilling too. Like the whole idea of like you have to be quiet all the time, like that, like just that part, even without the monster part, like just having to think, could you do that? Like how hard would that be to like not talk to people?
yeah,
Like I love that sort of like social terror that it puts on it too.
yeah.
Well done movie. Despite all those things, obviously, launched a new genre of horror movie with Bird Box.
Yeah.
Very obviously being very similar in tone.
Yeah, yeah. I think A Quiet Place is considerably better than Bird Box. I don't know if you watched Bird Box.
I have, and yes, I agree. I think A Quiet Place is a much better movie. I think, but that's why I think of it as like the movie that sort of launched this new genre of like using this other context of like what it would be like to live in that world as part of the horror, as opposed to just the horror being the horror.
Right.
And I do think that Bird Box is, to use a term that we use with Ready Player One, is serviceable in that genre. There's a lot of things that don't make sense in there. There's a lot of things that aren't as tight as A Quiet Place, but it was fun to watch, entertaining and serviceable. And I think A Quiet Place has changed the dynamic of horror movies in a way that, that sort of that psychological terror of like, but more modern is now something that people are going to explore, and I like that.
Right.
I think it's an interesting new thing.
Yeah. I think though that especially because the comparison is, I think, obvious, to compare the two movies, I think where A Quiet Place is very elegant compared to a Bird Box. Bird Box is that thing where, like, as long as you're just kind of watching it to watch it and you just kind of follow the movie along and you're not worrying too much about the rules of these things, these monsters, however they're supposed to work, and you're just going to just be along for the ride, then yeah, it's fine. But the rules or the logic of the situation break down immediately this instant you start asking any questions about it.
Yes.
They don't make any sense at all. And they're not even internally consistent within the movie. And they kind of, they evolve in arbitrary directions to serve, whatever plot need they have at the moment. Which is, like, again, it works in the moment. It just doesn't hold up to later scrutiny.
Right. It's a movie where you come in, you put your punch card in, I'm going to watch a movie.
Yeah.
and you have to you sort of check out of the other rest of the reality of it, and you just kind of watch it and enjoy it, and you follow along. But yeah, like,
well, and Sandra Bullock carries a lot of the weight too for that, just bringing us along with her. Yeah. But but in A Quiet Place,
it's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah,
100% agree. Quiet Place much more elegant. Yeah, holds up.
The rules are simple. They follow sound. Period. That's the rules of these things. Sound draws them away. Sound draws them close. And then ultimately, like, the way you defeat them is they are essentially taking advantage of their super hearing by turning it against them. By creating like the feedback with the hearing aids, which is so great. First of all, to have this, this kid, this deaf kid as kind of one of the like hero characters, and to have like that be the key, like that's so wonderful. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and it just follows it. It sets up simple rules, and it rewards the characters for paying attention to those rules, and figuring out how to work within them. And so I think that's great about the writing.
Yes. And again, to draw on just another one of your comparisons of sort of the elegance of it versus the Bird Box, is that the idea that the deaf kid, the kid with the disability, becomes the superhero, that's so much clunkier in Bird Box, where it's like, oh, the people who can rescue them are the blind people. They're the ones who can live in this world. It's just not as like heroic. Like they're using the same thing of like taking the disability and making it the asset.
Well, it also doesn't really help against the fact that those monsters also do have physical form that they can just tear at you, and they also corrupt actual regular people who can just break into your house and hit you with a crowbar.
In the Bird Box?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, blind people doesn't give you any protection against either of those other two threats.
Yeah. And that's another criticism that has been levied against it, is that, it takes the disability of being blind and makes that an asset. It takes the disability of, mental disability, not mental disability, but like whatever. There's some reason that they create that, like, why certain people can look at them, but that just makes them like super crazy. And it's sort of like mental illness is kind of taken as like a deficit, and like it makes you like a worse person, whereas a blind, and it's just clunkier.
Yeah.
Quiet Place is so, like you said, so elegant, very clear. Rules are clear. This is how it works.
Right. And I think the performances are great. Our main kid is this young actress playing the main kid here was great. There were real emotional stakes in the movie, like not only in the backstory of realizing that she was indirectly responsible for the loss of one of her younger siblings previously, and the idea that there's going to be this new baby coming, which, you were mentioning earlier, like just the social terror of how do you live in that situation. The idea of, it's one thing when you have kids who are old enough to understand the concept of you have to be quiet, even with those challenges, but with a baby, like, it's just take all the normal terror that a new parent would have and multiply it. But yeah, so all of that, and like, I think John Krasinski has great performance, like his Jim face of that, like that concerned face, like it's so well used in this movie. He's really good at that face. Like, not to reduce his performance to a facial expression, but I mean, he's good at that facial expression.
Yeah, and it works for the context of the movie. So
yeah. And so, there's lots of great stuff in Quiet Place, and I tend to agree. Like, I'm not going through the rest of the list and trying to pick and choose which nominations it should have had instead of whatever is there. But I agree. I think it probably merited more than just sound editing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that came on the heels of Get Out doing so well last year. And people just being frustrated that it didn't really bust the doors open on the horror genre,
Yeah.
Because it had, obviously there was a whole other social piece to Get Out that was also very interesting that we've talked about.
Yeah.
but there were some people that were hoping that that would have helped like a movie like A Quiet Place, which is also a very well constructed horror movie, get a few more nominations. But
Yeah. But in any event, I think it was really good, and you know, does it deserve to win sound mixing or sound editing rather? I mean, maybe.
I mean, I think it would be fun if it did.
Yeah.
Just like if people would just give it that nod.
Yeah.
You know, I know that's not how it's supposed to work, but you know,
Yeah.
like just say, hey, you know what? This movie used this idea of sound editing to its advantage. Like in a better way. Like, yes, all these other movies have incredibly good sound editing, like from a technical capacity. But this one used it to tell the story. It's not just a well done technical capacity of a sound editing. So I think that would be nice if that won.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yep. So let's go ahead and move on. We've got 3 Best Picture nominees to talk about now. We've got Black Klansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Vice. Is there one of those that you just champing at the bit to start with?
No, I mean I have things to say about all of them.
Okay. Let's start with Vice, just because that was the most recent of the 3 that I've seen, and I know that you were a fan of it. We talked a little bit about how there had been some criticism of it. I've seen it now, and I'll confess to saying that I feel like I was a little, maybe confused is not quite the right word. Ambivalent at the end. So I'm kind of, what I'm asking you is kind of to sell me, like, so on where I should come down. I think my confusion feelings were mostly just on the nature of, I'm not sure what it is that I'm supposed to be feeling at the end. Because mostly what I feel like is, yeah, I kind of already didn't like Dick Cheney, and now I still don't like Dick Cheney, except I know more about him, I guess. And I'm not really sure what else I'm supposed to take away from it. But it's kind of muddled, so maybe you could help me clarify that.
So I think, and this is what I preface this, like it's tricky to sell anybody on this movie, because this movie has an odd wheelhouse of like where it lands.
Yeah.
Because it uses a lot of the same storytelling techniques that of The Big Short, obviously, which is his other movie, of telling a very complex, serious, big American story with this black humor thread that goes through it. But this one was it was, I guess, less agreeable. Like The Big Short, everybody kind of knew, like Wall Street was kind of the enemy in that one.
Yeah.
Like that was an easy thread.
It's like, can't we all agree that this is pretty messed up, what these people got away with and all the damage they did?
Right. And so let's laugh at kind of the black comedy of the characters that exposed it. Like we're kind of laughing along with them.
Yeah.
This one isn't nearly as clear, and
it felt to me like, even though it was in many respects kind of giving lip service to a lot of the terrible things he did, it felt kind of to me like the movie ultimately kind of appreciates him and thinks of him kind of like a badass anti-hero.
I mean, I think I even said that in the last thing, is that there is a segment of like my friends who are like that still retain some of that old, like, I know it's called neocon, but it's not really neo anymore. Like, but that neocon like thing, like they joke that this was the best superhero movie of the year, and that it celebrates him, and I think, but I think that's what is interesting about this movie, is that it is complex in how it tells the story. I think it's interesting I really like you left that as sort of dismissive, as I didn't like Dick Cheney, but I knew more about him at the end. Like I felt like one of the strengths of the movie is understanding a little bit more about him, and like kind of what drove this, and where did this guy come from, and like why why did he get here, and how did he become a believer in these things, and or was he even a believer in these things, or what and just the complexities of that, and the taking something that I thought were a lot of really terrible things that I went through, like I lived through, and putting this sort of odd black comedic veneer on it to allow them to tell the story in a way that I like. And I said, like, some people have felt like this was a hit piece, some people have felt like this was a hero piece, and some people kind of fall in the middle, and when they don't understand why. And then there's some people who like me, who just think this was like really funny in a dark way. Like, I admit that the humor is not, they're not good. Like, they're not happy, positive jokes. Like, it is really dark, but it's kind of like what I needed to allow them to tell the story of a guy who was obviously very successful, obviously did a lot of good, really good, like he did a lot of things right. Like,
well, in the context of achieving his goals.
In the context of achieving his goals, in the context of, taking care of his family and raising these kids, but there's these weird things that happened within that, and there's these weird moments that, to tell it with this kind of comedic undertone that doesn't feel right, actually felt right for me. And I'm not, and so my point, I guess, is that I don't know that I'll ever be able to sell you on the movie. I feel like this movie, if you're primed for what the way the story is going to tell it, you're going to love it the way that I loved it. But it's okay with you not. Like, it's almost like it's accepted that you're okay with it not reaching you.
Yeah, well, I think, like, when you describe it as like some people thought it was a hit piece, some people thought it was a hero piece, like the reaction I have hearing that is I feel like the movie doesn't know which it is.
See, and I don't see it that way, and I'm not trying to tell you not to see it that way. I feel like that's where the movie lands, is that, and I think that's because for me, that's why some people see it as a hit piece and some people see it as a hero piece, is that the way that it tells the story is meant to be this sort of convoluted middle of, this was somebody who was super effective at what he did. That's the hero piece part. These were people who did some really terrible stuff. That's the hit piece part. But then they mix it with this kind of comedic part for those of us that kind of like fall in the middle and want to know more and understand more about what drove these guys, and are willing to take like sort of that satirical look at it and watch it with that dark tone. And I'm not trying to say, like, I don't want that to sound like it's not meant to sound like there's sort of this elite audience for this movie. Like, it's just a unique audience for this movie. And I feel like the movie's okay that some people will look at it this way, some will look at it this way, some will look at it like you and like, oh, it's just wishy-washy on both. And some will look at it like me and say, what a great merge of the two with just this dark theme that I really enjoyed, that left the movie feeling satisfied with what I had watched and what I had learned, and having laughed in a way that was sort of uncomfortable, but that kind of felt good to laugh that way. And I can't, and like I said, I can't sell anybody on that. I can't make you think that I am literally laughing out loud at the part where he, goes, retires into Halliburton, and it does the end credits, and it's saying,
I did laugh at that. It's because it gives that first moment of, the first title card of, he had the choice of choosing his career or his daughter, and he chose his daughter. And I'm like, wait, is that what happened? And then it goes on to the next thing, which I knew didn't happen. And I'm like, wait a minute. And then it starts doing this Cialis commercial thing at behind the house. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here.
It's so funny to me. Like, I'm dying. Like, I was laughing at Abby. Like, my wife is just like, she didn't get what was so funny. Like, she knew ostensibly like what was happening, but it wasn't as funny to her.
Well, so
the whole thread of the guy who got, is the narrator, is actually the guy who got killed by a car, and gave him his heart, and so they feel like they have this. I mean, that just like that. I thought that was funny, and I get why people don't understand what the joke thread is.
I thought that was clever, which I don't quite think is exactly the same as being funny. But I see what you mean. Like, I'm not disagreeing with it being funny to you or saying that it shouldn't be or anything like that. I just mean, I agree that it was clever. But I mean, I think there was a lot of stuff in the movie where it felt like the movie was wanting me to laugh at something that I didn't especially think was funny. Like the bits of earlier on where he asks Steve Carell's character, I'm totally blanking on his name, right? Secretary of Defense.
Rumsfeld.
Yes. I don't know why I couldn't pull that name out of thin air at the moment, but like he asks, "What do we believe?" and he just laughs at him. And like I feel like the movie is wanting me to laugh at, "Oh, isn't it funny how these guys don't actually have any core principles?" And I'm like, I don't actually think that's funny.
Right, and that's where I come down. Like it's like things like that why I can't sell you on like liking the movie the way that I do, because while I'm not like, I don't find that funny that people don't have core principles.
Yeah,
I find the context in which they're telling this story and the sort of uncomfortableness with which they told that joke as funny in a way that felt uncomfortable, but not in a terrible way. Like in a way that I kind of left like kind of enjoying how uncomfortable it's hard. It hits a weird note.
Well, and I'll definitely say I 100% get how, I mean, movies are art. Art is subjective. Sometimes things just hit you in just the right way and they just work, and then but they don't work for other people. Like, so I get that, and I could see how this movie could be that, but I do feel like it kind of missed me. Like I like all of the different nominations that it's like, for me, I think any failings that it has are all really writing to my mind, although you could tie like direction into that, just in the sense of feeling like if this movie was trying to communicate something to me, the message was lost.
Right.
Because I didn't sit down in the theater to just learn trivia about Dick Cheney. I was kind of wanting there to be some sort of a message communicated, and I didn't get it. It felt muddled to me.
And the message that I left with is that sometimes when these things happen, like sometimes you just sort of have to laugh at the absurdity of how it all got there and move on, because there's that's not like a hopeful point, but that's like, to any point that I left with, that's kind of what I left with, and I was okay with that. And again, I have to keep reiterating, I don't think I can tell you on the movie.
Yeah, and again, I
went through the conversation thinking I could.
I'm sorry for opening it as though that was your responsibility to do that. It's like I know, and I'm saying I'm sorry for framing it that way, because that's not really fair. It's a subjective thing. But I just know that sometimes when the feelings are a little confused and then we talk through them, I mean, sometimes it crystallizes a little bit, right?
Right, and I guess so for this movie, I don't know that there is anything that I can say that will help crystallize this in a way that you will feel differently. I'm accepting that premise going into it, that there's not something that I feel like you missed, or that if you were more enlightened or thought about things a different way or felt this way, you would somehow, like, this movie would make more sense to you. Like, I totally get it. And then same thing, I didn't, like, my wife had a lot of issues with the movie too, and like she really disliked the fact that there were some subtle characterizations of a lot of the characters, and then the George Bush character was like an over characterization of him, and that just sat weird with her. Like she got that they were kind of painting everybody in a negative way, but she felt like they just clowned him too much. And I get that too. Like, but I feel like that's part of what the movie is trying to do, is like, it's like playing him as like this juxtaposition of like, you know, this was because it's trying to show that like this was sort of this shadow government thing. And so they
Yeah,
have to
it's
play
kind
him
of
as like,
yeah, it's kind of absolving W in a way, like indicating, like implying that he's too stupid to have done any of the evil stuff. That was all Cheney somehow. Even though I think that's probably a dramatic oversimplification of the.
it is.
Yeah.
It's the way the movie's trying to play it. It's like, well, we're just going to take him and we're going to sort of take him out of the equation by making him so ridiculous that then we can tell the story of how Cheney is like manipulating all of that. And like,
Yeah.
and again, it's taking a lot of dramatic license with how it does that. But that just didn't sit well with her. And I can't argue and say, well, no, they told, I mean, that like, they definitely overcharacterized him and made him seem like a fool. Like you can't, and if that doesn't sit right with you, I can't convince you the movie was doing something other than that.
Yeah,
I can tell you why I think they did it, but that doesn't make you like that.
I didn't have any problem with that part of the movie. I wonder if part of that might just be that I really like Sam Rockwell generally, and so I might be just inherently inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt regardless. You know what I mean? Like the baggage coming in is that I like the actor, and so I didn't mind that part of the movie.
Well, no, and I think that part of my point isn't that, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is that not even all people who dislike this movie will dislike it for the same reason.
No, yeah, and I think that's actually really central to the whole discussion here. And not to like give myself the credit or anything, but I feel like what left me a little bit cold, because there wasn't anything specific that I was feeling like I don't like this. I was just left at the end feeling like I don't know what that movie was trying to say. And so what that requires is people to sort of read into it and try to decipher the meaning from, you know, like get the signal out of the noise, so to speak. And people are coming up with different answers, right? And maybe that's kind of the intent. But if that's the intent, it didn't feel satisfying to me.
No, 100% agree. And, you know, I'm not going to compare this movie to Hemingway, but I'm going to use a sort of a Hemingway anecdote to kind of talk about what I think this movie was trying to do. And that, you know, there was a lot being made of the old man in the sea and the metaphors. Like, is there a Christian metaphor? Is there this? Is there that? Mm-hmm. And, you know, and when Hemingway's pressed about that, like, his response has always been like, no, I just wrote about an old guy trying to fish. And he knows that's not what it is. Like, what his point was that the reader takes what they take out of it, and he didn't want to put the impression of he painted a canvas that let you interpret it.
Yeah.
Yes, he probably had an intention, but you as the reader got to be the one who owned it.
Right.
And I'm not saying this is a Hemingway story, but to your point, the idea is, you know, he put together a very complex movie that has a lot of weird tones that you can sort of impact your own ideas onto. And for me, I liked it. I liked the way it made me feel. I liked the things I learned. I liked the way that it's, you know, the sort of nod to, hey, do you remember all of this? Like, yeah, it kind of sucked, but you know, like, let's just laugh about it because there's nothing we can do now. Like, it already happened. And for me that worked, and I can't make it work for anybody else.
Yeah.
I can totally understand. I didn't argue. I mean, I started to when I realized with my wife where I started to realize that I was never going to argue this movie with anybody. Like, to try to convince them. Like, I would have discussions like we're having, but there's no argument here. Like, I've accepted your position.
Well, it's also true that just being about politics, it's inherently lending itself to entrenched positions, right? I mean, people have strong feelings about political subjects, and so that can just lead to people being a little bit more inflexible on their opinions about certain things.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that that's necessarily wrong. I mean, part of, like, I think the ending left a bad taste in my mouth even more than I had really had before that, just because that last to the camera defense where it has Cheney sort of defending himself like, I can feel your judgment, but here's what I did. I kept your family safe, that sort of thing. First of all, like, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, I'm judging you because you did a lot of awful stuff and we just watched a lot of it. And I don't believe that he even believes what he's saying in that last speech. So I don't know why that's the ending of the movie.
Right, and that's the thing, is like, this is where, like, the movie is so complicated, is that I agree with your premise that, like, the whole point is that he doesn't agree with that. That he's created this, like, how I'm going to convince you to believe what I did was great. But he doesn't even truly believe in it, because you go back to even the joke where he asked Rumsfeld, what do we believe in? And, and he laughs. Like, we don't believe in any of this. So, like, I'm just selling you on this one last time. You know, and especially the way that the movie, like, the way that the ticks come, and, you know, it's not the direct scene before it, but it's like right before, it's coming before that, is when he allows his one daughter to attack his other daughter, who he spent his entire life trying to shield from this.
Yeah.
In order for political gain. It's almost like that was sort of the jump the shark moment of, okay, all the things that I've always actually been, and I pretended I wasn't, I have now embodied that. And I have now made that final decision, and that's where I am. And so that's why that defense rings so false at the end.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, but at the same time, like, the language of cinema is telling a different message than what would seem to be implied from the story that precedes it. You know what I mean? It's like, we have to interpret that we know he doesn't really believe it based on what we've seen, but the movie doesn't seem to be making any kind of a statement about why it lets him get the last word with his bullshit about it being to keep people's families safe, when we saw the whole thought process of why it was actually about oil fields.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. So I again, there is a lot to like about this movie. I think the performances are very good. The scene-by-scene writing, I think, is very good. Like, even though I feel ultimately the message felt kind of confused to me, like, on, like, a dialogue level, on a scene level, like, all of that's very good. The craft of the filmmaking is very good. You know, so there is a lot to like here. I just was left wanting a clearer statement, and maybe his intent was to not make a clear statement, but in that case, I don't like that about it. So, anyway.
And I fully accept your point of view on the movie. But I think that's an important thing for anybody going into this, is that
it's polarizing for sure.
It's polarizing in very, very different ways. It's not like there's the one side or the other side. Like, there are so many spectrums on which you'll see this movie, and you know, and it's just going to be whether it works for you or it doesn't. And I, as somebody who enjoyed the movie, have learned, like, I am never going to try to project why anyone else should enjoy the movie. I am accepting of anyone else's disenjoyment of the movie as a whole, you know, not of the craft of it. I mean, I think we can all agree that the craft was amazing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on then, unless you have anything else. No? Okay. So we've got Bohemian Rhapsody and Black Klansman. Do you have? I picked Vice first. You can pick the next one.
Let's do Black Klansman, because there's the political overtones to that one as well.
Sure. Yeah. See, like, as a contrast, in terms of just my own feeling about it, I feel like, you know, not that we expected different from Spike Lee, but I feel like it knows exactly what it's trying to say, and it says it very clearly.
Yes, but for me, that was also the problem with it, which is not that I disagree with its message, but like I want to make sure that I'm clear about that. That's always been one of my concerns with some of the Spike Lee movies. I feel like they are heavy-handed. And what you're describing as crystal clear in their message, to me, sometimes feels like overly heavy-handed in like how it's delivering it to you. And I felt like that was the same thing with this one. I enjoyed the movie. I thought the story was really interesting. I felt like the political message was just a little too much. Like there was just too much. And then, you know, it just in case I didn't feel like it was giving me like it made sure to like directly tie it in to modern day times at the end. It's like, hey, in case you didn't get what we've been driving into your head for that 2 hours, we're just going to make it explicit.
The reason I loved that particular moment where it suddenly ties all the stuff that we've been watching in this historical story to modern day stuff is exactly because I think there are a lot of people today whose position is, well, sure, all that racism we used to have was bad, but it's fixed now. And anyone who complains about it today is making too big a deal about it. There are lots of people who say stuff like that.
Right. And I guess for me, I felt like the movie already made that super clear in how it was modern. I guess it didn't, to me, it didn't need to do that. I get why it did, but it just didn't. And it's the same thing. Like, I don't want to say like this was a bad movie or I didn't enjoy it. I just, for me, that part of it felt so, again, I just keep using the term like heavy-handed, but it's been a thing with a lot of Spike Lee movies. Like there's a lot of his movies that I really enjoy, like Do the Right Thing. Like I feel the same way about that. Like I feel like there's just like this where it was supposed to be meant to be like it was sort of ambivalent and everybody was at fault for this riot. It like really kind of leaned it on these, you know, it felt like it put its thumb on the scales on one side. Yeah. Now this one obviously is a little bit more clear of which side your thumb should be on the scales, but it just felt like it was there still, you know, and I felt like it took away from some of my enjoyment of just watching this story unfold and like this interesting new thing that I didn't realize was a part of like not that the Klan I didn't understand was a part of our history, but like this guy's experience and it just sort of detracted a little bit for me, you know. So
yeah, see, I really liked it. I mean, on the one hand, the idea that it's heavy-handed, like I get that because it's not subtle, that's for sure.
No,
but to the extent of like, there are movies, and we've talked about them, where like we agree with the, you know, the central theme of whatever the message is, but I feel like the movie itself feels like being attending a boring lecture about something you already know. I feel like in this case, it felt more like a commiserating of, can you believe we are still having to say this stuff? And sort of an agreement of like, this is still happening. It is not done. It is not history. It is still today now. Here is a historical story where we got some cool victory happening, and yet we're dealing with a lot of the exact same problems today still.
So I forgot my computer charger.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if I can just switch the call over to my iPad.
Well, the stream is going from my end, so even if you need to hang out. Well, we're getting an echo now. Might have to put headphones in.
What just happened here?
Well, I see you now from a different angle.
But is it clean?
Yeah.
There we go.
All right.
iPad now. We can
That's pretty cool.
carry on.
Although when the way, yeah, so you have to point the iPad at a different angle because right now you're half off the screen.
I know, and it's because I have two versions of my screen here. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that for me, I was surprised by the end sequence where it suddenly, connected everything really explicitly to modern day. But it hit me like kind of a gut punch because it comes right after the feeling of victory in this historical story. But the note that the movie wants us to leave with is, and yet we are still dealing with this stuff. It has not gone away. It's still every day. And
yeah, I totally feel like that. I mean, I guess
I think part of what I liked about it, and I don't mean to cut you off, but
no, yeah, go ahead.
We talked a little bit about Green Book, even though you haven't seen it yet, and we didn't go into detail, but we talked a little bit about how there has been some criticism that it takes like real history of the African American experience and kind of makes it a story about a white guy learning to be less racist, and then everything's happily ever after at the end. Well, I feel like this movie, even though it wasn't made after Green Book, it feels like a response to that kind of story of saying, well, we had, a black guy who did some awesome stuff with some allies, and it was a temporary victory, but there's the fight is not solved. It's still happening. The problems are not gone.
Yes. 100% agree with all of that. I really liked that theme of the movie.
Yeah.
And again, to talk like some of the, other nominations that we're looking at just from the performances.
I think it was really just Adam Driver that was nominated for performances, right?
Oh yeah, it was only Adam Driver.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I forgot that. I can't remember his name. Who played Ron? The main guy.
Yeah, I know who you mean. I don't have the name ready either. I mean, I think he's not someone that I feel like I've seen in a lot of stuff, so I don't have his name ready either. But yeah, it's I was, I thought Adam Driver was very good in it, but it does feel a little bit like he's the only one. Like I don't know, but there's a lot of strong acting nominations this year, so. I don't think we don't have to read that into it too much.
No, but the writing is tight. The directing, it's a very, very good movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I enjoyed. I'm glad I watched the movie. I'm glad I got the message of the movie. Like my only thing, and again, it's like I think we've had this a couple of times where we come into this and we really like these movies and we have this like one thing that is like a ding, and we enter the conversation with that.
Yeah.
Like it's somehow like it doesn't belong. Like no,
right?
It
Yeah,
belongs.
Yeah. I mean, we had that whole conversation about Isle of Dogs, for example, where the whole conversation ended up being framed around the one thing that I was kind of intending to say. Let's touch on this and then move past it, and then it kind of framed the whole discussion.
And I feel like that's sort of the same thing with this. Is that I thought it was a great movie. Mm-hmm. My only detraction from it was that I felt like it was too heavy-handed for me. What it was trying to like just force a position and tie it, and then not only did it like I felt like it, and again maybe some of this is just because I was so in tune to what it was doing the whole time that I don't want to sound like an arrogant thing. Like I just feel like I got what it was doing the whole movie. That when it tied it in at the end, I didn't get the gut punch. I got the, okay, I get it. Like, you did this for 2 hours. Like, I don't need the explicit drawing. But then to hear you say, like, the explicit drawing together was the gut punch, like, that kind of makes me back off it a little bit and say, okay, like, even though it didn't work for me, I get why it's in there.
Yeah.
I get why it does that.
I mean, it's certainly a flashy technique, right? Because it's not in the story. It's separate from the actual primary narrative of the movie, and so it's kind of a gimmick in that regard. That's certainly true.
Right, and well, and there's a number of things in the story that are sort of flashy for the narrative. I mean, the bomb plot is not part of anything he actually did. It existed. It was a separate thing, and they sort of tied these things together. Which again, there's no issue with that. Like, you're trying to tell a narrative,
right?
Run the narrative. You know, I was fine with that part, but there, you know, it wasn't like the only flashy thing was to draw it to present day. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, especially coming at this after just talking about Vice, which is more ambiguous in its sort of what it's trying to say, you know, as opposed to this, which, you know, it's the idea of, you know, the two extremes, depending on what you are looking for. You know, one is ambiguous and the other is heavy-handed, right? Like, it's just a matter of perspective, right?
Right.
And I think that, you know, contrasting those movies directly highlights that about them, right? But I think in some ways, what, you know, without going too much into modern day politics, I am increasingly frustrated with, you know, the idea of like both sidesism. And I kind of appreciate a more clear statement of intent.
Yep.
And so I think that I was just maybe more primed to like a movie that is direct, even at the cost of maybe being a little heavy-handed, as opposed to one where you really kind of have to dig through it to try to figure out what it's saying.
Right. And the way that I looked at it, which I'm not saying my way is right and your way is wrong.
Well, right, it's
looking at, is that I felt like I got the point in this one early enough on that it just while I get that it needed to keep telling it because that's what it's telling, like, it just felt like too much for me. And what I left Vice with wasn't that it was like both sidesism or ambivalent. It was like it left it more up to me how I wanted to take the movie. Like, it felt like I got to have more agency in how I left the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying like that makes the way I saw Vice better than the way you did or the way that, you know, I saw that. Like, they're just different ways that we entered the movie.
Right,
like,
yeah.
That's how I left feeling these two movies is like, okay, I agree with you, but I get it. Mm-hmm. Oh, I get to take how I want to shape, like, what you've presented to me and how I want to enjoy this. Whereas you looked at it a little different, is like you told a wishy-washy story and you told a very clear story. And, you know, I'm not trying to diminish how you say it, but that's kind of like, and I see what
that's a fairly accurate summation of kind of how I felt about it. Yeah.
And I can see how those movies could leave me feeling the way I did and leave you feeling the way that you did. And I don't see one is right or one is wrong. One is mine and one is yours. You know?
I think both are well-made movies, and a lot of it comes down to
both on this list.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to like what are you looking for from the movie, right? And you know, in a movie where the story that you're telling is the kind of fun, kind of scary story about a black guy infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, that's interesting, but it kind of demands a straightforward message of, we know where we stand when we watch this movie.
Yeah, fair.
It kind of demands that. Like, it would be hard to tell that story where, like, what are you going to try to do is introduce a sympathetic Klan member? I mean, like, you know, it's like, if you're making a movie about this story, straightforward is where you kind of need to be, I think.
Well, and just to be clear where I was coming from, I didn't feel like it was heavy-handed in that the Klan is bad.
Oh no, no, I think I
meant
understand what you're
the
saying.
direct the link to the modern day
Yeah.
part. I felt that's the part I felt. Not that I felt like it was wrong. That's the part I felt like it was. God, I don't know which way this thing's supposed to go.
Yeah.
That's the part I felt like it was a little heavy-handed. And but again, so let's back up though and say like of some of the movies we talked about tonight and why these ones are on the best picture list and best director list is okay. With Ready Player One, we both agreed we liked the movie. And we both 100% agreed with what the movie was trying to do, what we liked about it, where its shortcomings were. With these two movies, we both really liked these movies, but we came at them from very like we left with very different takes of them, and they left us with these very different interpretations. That's why these movies are on there.
Yeah.
You know?
They merit discussion. You know,
Right.
there are complexities, you know, even in terms of straightforward message, but it's telling a complicated story that has lots of implications. It's not just an adventure fantasy that doesn't ultimately matter very much, you know. But yeah, so I feel like, you know, Spike Lee has made movies that I don't like very much, and he's made some movies that I like quite a bit. This was one of the ones that I liked quite a bit, and I feel like it was an interesting story that I didn't already know. I feel like it was an interesting little piece of history. It introduced characters who thought about things and talked about things that I thought were interesting, and just like, for example, our main character's dynamic with his Black Panther, or I guess student union. She wasn't in the Black Panthers, but girlfriend, where she basically was saying, yeah, but you're a cop, so you're kind of choosing the other side in a lot of respects. And he's like, well, I'm trying to be a good cop. And she's like, well, but you're also like supporting a system that does lots of bad things. And I liked that the movie had that discussion.
Yeah, right. Where it wasn't just like so crystal clear that I like you, so you're the one good cop or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to make sure that like I leave this with the same thing that you said. I liked all of those things you just said about it. In that it was an interesting historical piece, something I didn't know anything about, something that was just new to me, like super cool. Really liked all of that.
Yeah. Well, and the Adam Driver character had more going on to him than you might have initially thought at, you know, a synopsis level of the movie, because he ends up having to kind of reconcile in his own heart and mind the idea that although he is Jewish, most people around him don't actually know that, because he passes as non-Jewish and doesn't have to think about it for very much. And recognizing kind of the privilege of that, and then also when he's in the situation where now he has to pretend to not only not care, but to be vehemently on the other side, brings him closer to his own heritage and faith, which I thought was an interesting, you know, B-plot.
Right, and then and also that there is a character who is so vehemently anti-Jewish that he like suspects it out of Adam Driver's character, like that he's like he just knows there's a chance that he's Jewish, you know, and
well,
and that's just sort of like a weird, from Adam Driver's character's perspective, like that's a weird, terrifying thing of, well, I'm kind of like, I'm not proud or unproud to be Jewish, but I am, and yeah, I pass off, but I don't pass off for this guy, but this is the most dangerous guy to not pass off on. By.
Right, well, and I think that that's another smart, or another good thing that the movie does, is it does not fall into the trap of trying to claim that all racist people are also dumb. Because that's really not, like, you know, sometimes those traits correlate. But there are lots of smart people who are also racist. Intellectual intelligence does not prohibit racist feelings. And so setting up one of these main antagonists as like, oh shit, one of these guys is actually really smart. And he's suspicious of us, and he could mess this whole thing up. So we cannot underestimate this guy. But that also leads them to have to kind of double down on the hardest parts of what they're doing.
Yeah.
In order to, you know, try to stay out of this guy's radar.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so I thought I really liked it. It was I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, ultimately I enjoyed the movie. I think it's deserving. Mm-hmm. I had the one kind of hesitation with it, but I...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. A lot of it just depends on what you're looking for when you go to a movie. Yeah, the what you're in the mood for, what you are hoping to find when you watch a movie. So the last movie that we have in common here. Let me briefly tangent that there was also the movie Mirai, which was one of the best animated feature nominees that I did see. So maybe the brief review of that is that it is lovely. It is the story about okay. It is the story about a young boy who his family just came home with a new baby sister for him, and he's like 4. So it's that classic like jealousy thing. But the movie is essentially him kind of processing those emotions through kind of a series of episodic imagination sequences where he imagines transforming into a puppy, or imagines meeting a future, a version of his sister who has traveled back from the future, or going on a train trip because he likes trains and stuff like that. And so it's lovely. It's kind of self-contained. It's about, finding love in your family and working through those hard emotions and getting past conflict and everything. So it's lovely. If you have an opportunity to see it, you should. With one caveat, it requires a substantial tolerance for toddler tantrum screaming, because there's a lot in this movie. This little kid is a 4-year-old going through some hard stuff, and he cries and screams a lot. And so if you have a very low tolerance for those kinds of high voices doing screaming in the movie, it might bother you. Because I feel like usually those things don't bother me, and yet there's a lot in this movie. So, the only caveat in an otherwise lovely film. All right, Bohemian Rhapsody. So my brief take on it had been that I don't know that I think the first half or so is necessarily all that good, but that it finishes so strong that that's what a lot of people will leave the theater thinking about.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it was, I feel like it was entertaining. It closes hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole reenactment of the Live Aid concert is great stuff. I mean, the movie in many respects is using Queen's excellent music as kind of a crutch, which is not like, I shouldn't say crutch because that makes it sound like a bad thing. I'm just saying that it makes the most of the fact that it has that to work with. It really, that concert sequence is kind of incredible, even though there's like even in that sequence, there's some really goofy stuff in it, like the cuts to the phone bank for Live Aid that seems to imply that nobody was calling to make any donations until Freddie Mercury went on stage, and now they're gonna make money for AIDS. And you're just like, okay, I mean, there's a lot of other musical acts playing in that concert. You know, I mean, Queen was great, but they're not the only ones.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they were the closers, but it's not like it went from 0 to
Right,
60.
yeah. Like the implication in the movie is that, uh-oh, what are we going to do? Nobody's calling. And then all of a sudden the phones start to light up because Queen is awesome. And it's like, yes, Queen is awesome, but like that's not what happened. So it was the sort of thing that the movie has these really awkward steps in a number of places. But boy, that concert scene is so incredible.
Well, yeah, it is, and the build up to it is also very good. Like it definitely gives the flavor of like what the stakes were and like why, like how they hadn't been friendly and why it was such a big deal that they were coming back together and how they won Freddie over and like why he chose to do it and like where he was in his life and you know that texture makes it like and so you don't want to excuse some of that, like the build in to why this was so big of a deal. Not just this was a great concert, but this was a concert that almost didn't happen, and that only happened for a very few particular reasons, and we should be lucky that this all came together the way that it did and exists as a form of medium that we have.
Yeah,
and I think it does that phenomenally. I think it gives a really good insight as a biopic into Freddie. I think it has some missteps, but yeah.
I want to talk about that because I don't disagree with anything you said, but I want to discuss the last bit just because I think that Rami Malek's performance is incredible. It's great. It's beyond just an impersonation. I feel like you love him as Freddie. And he's so great in the music sequence. He's great in the other sequence, non-music sequences. I think his performance is incredible.
Yes. I before I watched this movie, I was convinced that Christian Bale should win this award, and I know I sort of paid lip service to this was a 2-horse race. I now 100% believe this is a 2-horse race, and I'm not 100% convinced that Christian Bale should be the winner. Because he was so good. But
yeah, I think he's my favorite for Best Actor, honestly. Yeah. So I think he's great. But I think the movie overall still feels a little bit observational rather than insightful, if that makes sense. It's kind of a subtle distinction, I think. But
I think that's fair, and
it's the difference between having the access to observe him doing what he would be doing in private versus the ability to really get at the heart of what's going on inside.
Yep. I think that would be fair.
Yeah. Which, again, that's not necessarily a problem. It's just, it's a nuance that I actually thought about after the movie because the movie left me thinking about it. That's why when you were saying it's an insightful observation, I'm not disagreeing. I wanted to deconstruct that a little bit to talk about what the movie is doing.
Right. It really is an observation. Here are things that you didn't see that sort of, again, ostensibly happened.
Yeah.
But without really driving into it. And you're right, because there are some times where it does give a little bit of a nod to something where you're like, man, I wish I knew a little bit more about what was going on there. Like,
yeah.
Like when he gets in the first fight with his wife, and he's trying to like explain away like what he's doing, and she's like, Freddie, like you're not like none of these things like you're gay, Freddie, you're
Mm-hmm.
gay.
Right.
And he's like not accepting that from his own wife, who's like like trying to force that on him, and it's like, and then there's this
And
whole
the
like
movie has
again,
not shown us why she would know that.
right, and then there's the observational piece of like them remaining like not necessarily married but friends, like
Mm-hmm.
that, like there's this weird relationship between them where he continues to like keep her close because he does love her. He just doesn't love her as a partner, and
Mm-hmm.
and it never gives us any more than that, other than like you said, like the observational piece of it, which
Yeah.
again was interesting because it's just something we weren't aware of as just kind of casual, like knowing of what Queen is,
Mm-hmm.
but to realize like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, we all know Freddie Mercury was gay, but to realize that like he argued that with his own wife, like that
Mm-hmm.
is, that's something
Well,
new to us.
he had a
Yeah,
wife.
yeah,
It makes
he had
that
a wife.
inherently complicated, right?
Yeah,
Um, and then obviously, like I'm not like a Queen expert. I was not the person who knew all the ins and outs or anything. Like I knew I liked the music. I knew a little bit about Freddie. That's really kind of where I came into this movie. So I was not the one who knew all the trivia and the ins and outs or anything like that. But
same. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that um, like what my ultimate takeaways from this movie are that it really makes the most of the music library that they have available when they're making a movie about Queen, right? And they really make the most of it. Like the scenes where the music is involved are all great. And I think Rami Malek has a really just transcendent performance that is it keeps us at a little bit of an emotional arm's length, which is not necessarily bad. It's just, again, it's a distinction from something where we really sort of feel like we get at the heart of him, I think.
Yep.
Um, and, but his performance is just amazing. And like, the movie finishes so strong that I think that's really what a lot of people are left with. But I also think there's a lot of stuff in the first half that is just kind of like, okay, what is okay? What's happening now? Okay, this is going on for a long time. I'm not sure what this is supposed to mean. It feels like it's really wanting to sidestep certain issues that everybody already knows. Like, why is it playing so coy with him being gay earlier on? It's like that scene you mentioned. Just like she knows and we know, but the movie hasn't really shown us anything except him following a guy casually into a restroom at a gas station once. And she wasn't there, so why would she know?
Right.
Like, so the movie seems like, and I, I've read some articles that suggest some of what was going on there is that there's some behind the scenes movie production stuff of the surviving members of Queen having a lot of creative input on, first of all, making sure that each of their parts were significant enough in the movie, and also wanting to avoid certain subjects. And that maybe some of the awkwardness comes from that, but I don't know.
I I I mean, I could see that in the fact that one of the reasons why you know the director was chosen despite all of the issues was that Queen felt like they had the
Mm-hmm.
most dramatic input with him as at the helm.
Right, yeah, they had kind of an understanding with him that he would listen to what they had to say.
Right. And so yeah, there's just a lot of which that I tried to go into this movie, and I feel like I successfully did with taking all of that out. Like, not to say we can't like bring that back into the movie once we're done.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went and sat down to watch the movie, I feel like I did a great job of divorcing myself of all of that and just said I just want to watch this movie,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to forget all of that for now. And I did, and and it was good. But then when you plug back in and you have to start thinking about some of the ways that some of the awkward steps came into the movie, you start to have to remember that, this was a strange director choice, and that part of that was because the remaining cast members of Queen wanted a lot of input, and they felt like they had that with him.
Yeah.
And then you start to hear, oh, well, they wanted to make sure that certain things were told a certain way in the way that this unfolded. And you start to see that, oh, well, here's this scene from his perspective. Like, it almost feels like that at some point in the movie where they're like, oh, and here's, I can't remember all their names, but, here's
it's like Brian May and
here's
Roger
Brian's
something.
perspective on, like, this part of the situation. And then it sort of shifts to someone else's perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's grind the scene to a halt so that everybody in the room can have a line. And, yeah.
Right. Well, and even there are scenes that it's like, well, here is scene X, which is definitely from the drummer's perspective of like how this happened, and then we move to the next scene, and so it's like, you're telling certain micro stories within it that are coming from clearly one member's voice, and so there's just a lot of that, like, again, but it leads to this observational feel, which is still fun to watch.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, leaves you a little wanting until it starts to kill it with the music. Like you said, it's not a crutch, but it is.
Well,
it does lean into it.
Well, right. It is the reason you want to make a movie about Queen, is because they've got great music, and if you're gonna make a movie about Queen, I hope that you're ready to deliver on the music part of it, because. And to the movie's credit, it sure does. Pretty much every scene that has anything to do with the music is pretty great, I think.
Yes, and I will still just, again, one last time echo that it not only does it do great with the scenes that have to do with the music, it does do a good job of adding, like, that extra context to those scenes. That whether it's true or not, like, it just makes them a little bit richer than if you were just watching it. And it does that with the end scene, like, a little, like, more dramatically. But there's some great parts in there when they're, like, pitching Bohemian Rhapsody, and, like, the way that they're just. That's where the observational part actually gives texture.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, and there is some really pretty deft filmmaking going on the writing level. That, like, there's not everything that I love about the first half to 2/3 of the movie, but, like, there's some great stuff in it that is all meant to build to that big climactic concert sequence, right? Where we have various scenes where we see resonance given to one line or another of various songs, right? Like, where we get added meaning to some line or other. And then what that builds to at the end is that when we see them performing that song and we get to that line, we're now reminded of that additional context, and having it all feed in together to where Freddie's at that moment of feeling like this might be my last concert. I am already maybe starting to lose it a little bit, but I want to do the best I can, and this is, my family, and this all means a lot. And now, we remember when he was sitting at the piano at that little farm recording studio when he came up with this, sometimes I wish I'd never been born at all, but now that has the weight of, but now he's going to die and he doesn't want to die, and and then that leads into the I don't want to die, and it's like it gives that extra meaning and weight to each line that we get to hear now in the concert sequence, and it's good filmmaking.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that the movie in total is uneven, but it sure finishes strong, and I think it's a it's like case study exhibit 1 of how if a movie begins well and ends bad, people will walk out of it thinking it's a bad movie. But if it begins not so great but ends really good, people walk out of it thinking it's a good movie.
Yep.
It's interesting, just briefly, to compare mediums, because with a movie, by and large, at least if we're talking about in the theater, a bad beginning, you're not going to walk out. You bought a ticket already. You're going to sit there and watch the movie, right? You're not going to walk out just because the beginning's a little boring or something like that, right? Whereas a book is more likely to need a strong beginning because people are much more likely to not finish a book if it's not engaging right away. And so I think it's just interesting how one medium is more reliant on a strong beginning and the other one is perhaps more reliant on a strong ending. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, Bohemian Rhapsody. So, I think, did you have anything more about that one, or? I think having seen all of the Best Picture and Best Animated Feature nominees, I will actually still say that just in terms of my own personal enjoyment, I would actually still give Into the Spider-Verse best, like, total. Not just best animated, but, like, best picture, period. For me. Certainly in the best animated feature thing, it's my favorite by a wide margin. It's one of my favorite animated movies in a long time. But for the best picture category, I think the favorite is pretty up there. And I really like Black Panther 2, even though they're very different films, so it feels a little weird to try to compare them. Oops. You lost your camera there?
Should be...
Oh, there you are. Again,
yes.
Yeah. So I think, there weren't any this year that I really just didn't like and felt like don't deserve to be on the list.
That's a strange prediction.
Well, I didn't say it was a prediction. I said that was my feeling about it. This year is hard to predict. There's no real front runner because all of the different awards have been given the top honors to different movies.
Yep. Yeah, I have no idea. I don't think it's any secret that Vice remains my favorite, but I also understand that it is, per our discussion, it's not for everybody. I don't expect it to win. I liked it the best. And then animated, I didn't see enough.
Yeah, well, yeah. But it's, I was happy with the sort of the marathon effort this year, just in the sense of not just getting to a high percentage, but that I feel like I watched movies that I probably wouldn't have watched otherwise and really liked. And The Favorite is a good example of that, is that I didn't even know what it was. I hadn't even ever heard of it before the nominations came out, and I loved it.
Yes, and well, I will see it. Just by the nature of the timing, though, we won't be able to discuss it prior to the awards.
But yeah, so I think that's where we stand now. A few days away from the awards ceremony. But so I hope. Thank you for everyone for watching or listening along with our marathon this year, and go out and watch good movies.
Yay.